Hello, and thank you once again for joining the Distributed Republic webcast. So, if you haven't seen our webcast before, first of all, welcome. If you have and you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. We really enjoy having your questions, comments, and thoughts on the subjects that we're talking about. So, the point of the Distributed Republic webcast is we explore the impact of decentralization, Web3, the Metaverse, and AI on our social, economic, and political systems. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to make sure that we are ensuring that communities that can benefit the most from the inception of new technologies have access to the resources, education, and expertise to thrive in a digital world. And what's really important about this webcast is we try to make sure that we're doing it in a way that minimizes the jargon. So we want this to be a really entry level. If you're not used to these topics, if it's not something you've heard before, and it's something that's completely, brand new to you, what we do is do our best to explain it at that high level concept. And that means what we're going to do is we're going to try and keep our answers, relatively short. We won't make them too rambly. We do our best. And also we're going to try and minimize the jargon as well. So what that means is any kind of technical terms, we'll do our best to explain on the way. However, it's impossible to talk about these subjects without a little bit of terminology. So our friends at CyberGear have created this fantastic Web3 terminology guide. And what you can do is download it at my Stan store, which is www.stan.store/Jamie Bykov-Brett. From there, you'll be able to download the guide. So if you're hearing a word and you're like, I don't know what that means, check it out because we probably have the answers very easily for you to be able to access. Additionally, we really love it when we can get your comments and questions coming in. We've got a fantastic guest today, Navin, we're going to introduce in a second. But the whole point of this is we want to be able to give you access to that expertise that sometimes can be hard to find. So do add those comments in. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions and comments at the end. So on to today's episode. Very exciting. And I think me and Navin first spoke about doing this maybe November last year because it's such an important topic that people have a huge interest in, which is how can we leverage blockchain in commerce? I've said his name a few times, but it's my great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine, Navin. Navin, I would like you to introduce yourself to give you full justice of what you do and how you do it.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I run a very conventional business in a very traditional, conventional sector, in the environmental sector. And I started to pivot around about 2 years ago to Web3 because part of my business deals in supply chain and chain of custody and product life cycles. And I recognize blockchain as being a useful tool for that. So I'm still pivoting at the moment. I've got one foot in both camps. So I'm transitioning from Web 0 to Web 3. And my kind of involvement in Web 3 was based around the concept of a product, which was a consolidation tool for luxury assets, luxury digitals. I got so far with it and I realized actually there's so many things that need to happen before a tool like this can exist, which is based around interoperability, that I've kind of put the brakes on it for the moment. And I'm focusing on that issue, interoperability, and also kind of looking at other other startups and that are in that sector and just kind of giving some advice on those where I can.
Amazing. There was two terms in there that I think are really important to do a bit of a deep dive into, which is phygital and interoperability. Can you explain a little bit more about how that ties into blockchain and the services that you're working on?
Yeah, okay. So phygital, in a very literal sense, I have a pen here, a physical pen. And in the way that I deal with phygital, so there's kind of two different terms of two different types of phygital. There's an aesthetic phygital where you could have a representation of this in like a metaverse application, or you could have just a digital version of it, which is a data file which has stores information about this pen, the material it was made of, the factory it was made in, supply chain details, me as the owner, I sell it to Jamie. Jamie then that transfer then occurs on the ledger, and that's my kind of version of a phygital.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose the way that that ties in with interoperability, which is that interchange of data between blockchains, is it's almost like a digital product passport, right? You could break down each product and go, hey, we know ownership, we know the materials, we know, if you want to be able to resell it, we know who's had it before, if it's owned by a celebrity, all of that information, the data that then can follow around that physical product, which is an amazing aspect. I think there's so much application for that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to delve into a little bit more on a high scale of what this kind of technology could mean, particularly for really leveraging blockchain in the future of e-commerce, which leads me very nicely onto my first question, which is, how do you see blockchain impacting the future of e-commerce?
Okay, I would like to hope that it's in a not very obvious way, because I think if you look at if you look at civilization, you think about civilization as a time scale, right? We started sort of trading and bartering flint and animal skins at a certain point, and then it evolved into something that had more value, which was gold and gemstones and spices. And very far on, we had a currency, and then we suddenly had this kind of digital version of a currency, which isn't a CBDC, it's not a central bank digital currency, but it's essentially the physical money we have being represented as numbers on a bank account. And within the last sort of 15, 20 years, we have this kind of concept of e-commerce, and it's evolved so quickly. And if you think about that e-commerce stage in that civilization timeline, it's tiny. And we still have people now, like my mum, who won't do an online transaction. Okay, she refuses to put her debit card details online because she doesn't trust it. She's just not very trusting of it. So hopefully, the integration of blockchain will be seamless in so much as we don't know that it's there. And the reality is, it's anyone's guess how it will look like, because the space is evolving very quickly. But there's some fundamental pillars that blockchain can apply to the world of e-commerce: security, transparency, and efficiency as well, in terms of removing intermediaries by having smart contracts which can execute transactions and just kind of make the supply chain of that asset very, very much cleaner.
Very nice. I really like the example with your mum there, and saying, how trusting can people be of putting their details online? Because one of the things that I always think is quite interesting from a blockchain perspective is the permanence of it. Like when people are learning blockchain, it's not the same as well, I tell you, I give a comparison to is when you go into work and you're learning how to use a database, you normally go in a practice system to be able to do it, and you don't quite have the same opportunities to be able to do that in a blockchain space. Once you're practicing on it, you've often gone live on it, or that data's there and you can't delete it. That's the whole point of the blockchain. So there is this kind of learning process of going through and thinking about how we're going to look at that data that's being stored on the blockchain. And I think there's a huge element here as well, where we're really talking about, going back to what you're saying, that the history of humanity in lots of ways is also the history of keeping ledgers. That's the whole thing. When we've started with any kind of currency and what we were trading, it's a ledger of one thing, it's a ledger done in another way, whether it's an abacus in the Houses of Parliament, which is how they used to be able to monitor taxes and everything like that, all the way to what we're moving to now. And I think there's a great terminology of it being considered the fourth ledger. How do we not just keep things on centralized databases, but what's the value in keeping them in decentralized databases? And I think that's really powerful, because actually a lot of our day-to-day jobs are just updating databases. We're just updating databases in a different way. So huge impact that this decentralized technology could have on the future of e-commerce, which leads me on to my next question. How could blockchain technology be used to improve supply chain management in the commerce industry?
So again, I think it depends on how it evolves, but in a very visual sense, if you can imagine, I go to buy this T-shirt, and this T-shirt's a connected product because it has some form of device in it, some form of hardware, NFC chip, RFID, and I can, whilst I'm in a shop, I can scan it and get some details based on the factory it was manufactured in, the person that manufactured it in that factory. Okay, the material composition, how those materials were sourced, and the dye that's been used in it. Okay, the distribution from the factory to retailer, and then A, B, C points in between. So I'm starting to track its carbon miles. In terms of a kind of 360-degree supply chain view of an asset, blockchain can supply that. And I think this isn't what's interesting about this isn't a kind of hypothetical conversation, because I think it was wasn't Mercedes, it was BMW in 2018 used blockchain to track the supply chain of cobalt for their electric vehicles. So there's like an industrial use case or an enterprise use case for blockchain, which can be very easily applied to assets that we purchase. And I think as consumers, we're asking for those kinds of details more and more now. We get hang tags which kind of tell a bit of a story, tell us that the product we are buying is made of 51% recycled material, whatever. We want to see that. We want to know that we are making considered consumption choices.
Yeah, I love that, particularly that considered consumption, because we're much more passionate around understanding our supply chain now. We care about the ethics of it. We care who got paid what at each point of the journey. And using blockchain, we can have that transparency. One of the things I always find quite interesting about blockchain as well is that comparison of being really open, freely available data, but also being anonymous and being able to keep that anonymity at the same time, and how those two identities seem to have fallen within this one ledger. And how that can impact our perspective on things, because we want to be able to make sure that we know who's done what at what point, what they were compensated for it, where those materials had come from, and what's the value of that product takes on a new value. It's no longer just a piece of clothing anymore. It's an ethical decision. It's a moral stance that gets tied into it, which I think has a huge amount of value to consumers looking to be able to use blockchain as a meaningful way to manage their supply chain, which I think ties in quite nicely to this one as well, which is how can blockchain enable greater transparency in e-commerce?
Yeah, and it does tie in perfectly. So it's a really nice segue, because that ledger you're talking about, that decentralized ledger, which has got all of the touch points, all of the transactions, the interactions between all of the different parties involved within a supply chain, within the purchasing and then the reselling of an asset, is all there on a ledger. So it's there, it's transparent for everyone to see. Anyone that has permissions to see it can see it. And the important thing about that as well is providing that transparency. And again, it's kind of linked to the previous question that we answered. Also, for things like certain sectors like luxury, it provides the authenticity that you need when you're doing your due diligence in purchasing an asset. So if you're going to buy a watch, it's a high value watch. I think the luxury industry is kind of the counterfeit luxury industry is almost as large as the luxury industry. Okay. So that, if you're going to spend a large quantity of money on a watch, and you're going to want to do your due diligence. Now, at the moment, you have things like little credit cards with holograms on them, and you can buy them on reselling platforms quite easily. So it's not foolproof at the moment, but you buy an asset and you have a full chain of custody on ledger, all of the touch points, and it all kind of corresponds with the asset you're buying. It's completely transparent. As a consumer, it makes, again, it's a considered consumption, but it's considered in a different way. You're making a considered investment in an asset. But it's also a sound consumption as well.
Mm-hmm. I think what I pick out from that bit, and I once again really like the example of the counterfeiting industry versus the authenticity of the luxury product, is how much evolution there will be of both counterfeited and real products. Because as soon as you've got one where you go, well, we've got this transparency here, people are going to find ways to be able to manipulate that or make something that looks, inauthentic to make it look authentic. And I suppose what I really find quite an interesting concept of both is this whole idea of decentralization and utilizing decentralized ledgers to be able to do it. But also with the thing that people have become really passionate about and can see the value of is AI, which is inherently centralized. If you want to be able to scan it, I think it was you might have told me, but if you go into a store and you want to buy a Gucci handbag, you can scan it with an AI and they'll be able to tell you if it's counterfeit or not. And we have this kind of competition going on between these two technologies that have inherently different bases, but are kind of collaborating in some way. And it'll be really interesting to see how AI can help facilitate some of that blockchain aspect as well, because there's a huge amount of value in both of them. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that was that. If you remember, we both sat and listened to a talk at NFT London. Mia Suarez, and I've forgotten the name of the company now, but she has developed a platform which is doing just that, where you can use a smartphone to take a photo of an asset, and it will tell you whether it's genuine or not. I think that it's incredible. And I was struggling to see where AI fits into the kind of Web3 model a few weeks back, just because it evolves very quickly, and I haven't got a tech background, so I kind of get in my head around the various aspects of Web3, and then suddenly someone goes and throws AI in it, and I'm thinking, oh God, not another thing, And I think you're the worst person as well to follow on it, because you know so much about it. But let me just very quickly talk about like a real life scenario where that kind of transparency in that supply chain and commerce is relatable to my existing company, which is a non-tech company, but we have to rely on sound procurement for safety equipment, specifically working at height safety equipment. Okay, and we have to make sure that the equipment has been procured from a legitimate supplier. It comes with all its ENC certificates. We then catalogue that within our supply chain tracking system, and then we catalogue who it's distributed to, so which one of our team members now owns it or is in possession of it. And they are then under obligation to inspect it on a weekly basis. And every 6 months, we have a more in-depth inspection from a third party. So, getting that. But the thing to point out there is these assets are counterfeited too. It's not just luxury assets. It's industrial application use cases as well. So these are counterfeited too. Now, if I had a carabiner that as a company we purchased, and I purchased it without CE certificates or EN certificates, and I deployed it to one of our crew members, and an incident was to occur. There was a fall from height. The onus would be on me to demonstrate that I'd done my due diligence, right? And I've got the certificate as the employer. I've got the certificates of conformity, and I didn't purchase it from some dubious place. And actually, exactly that.
Here's a load of carabiners, yeah.
Exactly. Here's my watches and my carabiners. But I'd be under obligation to make sure it didn't happen. So the blockchain could be applied for that purpose as well, and it just makes if the asset had some kind of hardware in it which enable like quick scanning, and then there's companies out there that I know do that specifically for work at height equipment. Then it makes the process a lot easier, and equally for users as well. If you've got an asset, if you've got a bag full of carabiners and a harness and some ropes or whatever, and you just pull something out and you can scan it without reading the serial number and searching it, you just scan it and it brings up the record for that one straight away. And I go, that's not my carabiner, it should be in Jamie's kit bag, So it's not just luxury, it's not just what we conventionally think about when we're thinking about building applications for Web3. It has touch points in kind of so many places in industry as well.
Yeah, really, really good points. And once again, when we're kind of looking at that, those digital convergence technologies, so your metaverse, your VR, your AI, your blockchain, your Web3, decentralization, all of these aspects kind of coming together in their own way. But the way that I think sometimes we get bogged down in the terminology here and going, well, that feels like a bit of an off-putting statement, or I'm not sure how I feel about AI, but I feel like this about blockchain. For me, the way that I just think about it is, what is the future of the internet and e-commerce? How could any technology fall in and shape the way that we're going to interact digitally? Because it's that erosion between our physical and our physical and our digital world. And essentially blockchain and the examples that you're giving there are just examples of, well, we don't need to necessarily have just a sign out form that says it. What we want to be able to do is have that as a digital ledger now. we want it to be accessible, if we need to be able to hand it over easily to a claims company, we should just be able to give them access to that ledger to be able to see, hey, this is what happened. This was the process it went through. They didn't even need to scan it. They've just walked through on a tracker, and it's picked up, who's worn it at what time based on identity badges, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's trying to figure out how these technologies tied together. But I would always recommend to people, don't get bogged down by the thought of trying to understand one technology. Think about the vision of how technology can enable you to do things in a different way. Because you don't need to be a detailed expert on everything to be able to know how to knit these things together. So next question. How does blockchain technology enable greater transparency in the commerce industry? Oh, we've just done that one. Done that one. Go pretending that I'm talking about something new, just going over the same stuff. No, next one. So how do you see a blockchain impacting the way that businesses handle customer data and privacy?
This is a really cool one. It's a really interesting one, because I think there's lots of discussions happening at the moment about digital IDs and sovereignty over our own data and our own identification. And there's at least a couple of people who are now in our MetaShapers group that are working on that as well. But I think at some point last year, towards the end of last year, I listened to a episode of Bankless, and I've forgotten who the guy was on it now, but the discussion was about signing with Ethereum. I don't know if you've come across it. It blew my mind away. So it was, I think it was EIP 4361 at that stage. It might be an ERC now. I don't know. I haven't kind of kept up to date with it. But the concept of that being that, and I'm terrible for it. Passwords for me are like I struggle with kind of maintaining 5 passwords, let alone the amount I've got over different platforms. So I rely really heavily on signing with Google and signing with Facebook. But of course, by doing that, I'm giving, I'll give you an example, Strava. I started using Strava recently to track my runs, and I had the option to sign in with Facebook or sign in with Google. And I didn't sign in with Facebook because I thought, well, if I sign in with Facebook, instantly Strava, without me kind of giving it permission, is going to know who of my contacts are on Strava, and it's not necessarily going to start posting my runs on there, right? But I just wasn't comfortable with Facebook having that level of information about me. So this signing with Ethereum, which was being spoken about on Bankless, really interested me, and the concept is just literally that you can sign in with your Ethereum account or your ENS profile, and by doing that, you can provide the kind of agent, or however you want to term that, with the information they require, but not necessarily all of it, right? And I think when you start thinking about like biometrics integrated in that, again, to get rid of passwords, because I think the danger in that, the initial thing that I thought with signing with Ethereum was, what happens if I lose kind of access to my Ethereum account, right? That's but then I started thinking about biometrics, and actually, as long as my face stays the same, my fingerprints stay the same, and that should be quite easy to access. So that kind of really excites me. I think taking the power away from large corporates and removing their ability to kind of leverage your own data, but just giving them what they need, is somewhere we're going to be heading. Is somewhere we are heading towards. So many people are working towards it now, and I think that's going to be something that e-commerce is going to have to consider, how they kind of change to or adapt their models to deal with this growing concern of people not wanting to give away so much data.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good turn of phrase, but data is the new oil and all that. Definitely for lots of cases, and it reminds me quite a lot of the Estonian system for digital identity, which is a centralized system, but the concept is that you should only ever have to hand over a piece of documentation once, and you should never have to hand it over again, and it should always sit on the system. But in doing so, you can also choose who you want to be able to have access to which data, and see when they've accessed it. So let's say it's the doctors, for example. You can go, hey, I want to be able to give my medical information to this surgery. But what I also want to be able to do is check when somebody's last gone into it and said, hey, yep, I know I've got that authenticity. And that's similar to what blockchain can provide us as well, is that database for us to be able to really go, who's visited this profile? When did they visit it? You know, what data did they want to be able to collect from it? Do I want to be able to give it away freely? And also, if people are going to give away their data, an opportunity for them to make money from it. You know, why should a corporate be the beneficiary of your data? If you're going to be sent these ads anyway and you're going, hey, I don't mind personalizing it, then I want to be able to have a cut of that advertising space. You want to advertise to me? You pay for the privilege of being able to do so. And that's something that blockchain could be used for from a customer's perspective, to really make sure that they have control and choice over what they want to happen with their data.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. But I think sort of just on that, I think again, like not getting kind of entrapped within like a particular brand's ecosystem is really important as well. And it goes back to this concept of interoperability, you know. And when you think about having these connected products that we spoke about with their own digital product passports or DPPs, and those products intrinsically being linked to our own ENS profiles, then you suddenly have you have a mug which everyone knows is mine. You know, a car. Okay, mug's a bad example, but you got a car which everyone knows is mine, and the shoes everyone knows is mine, and the watch. So if it gets stolen, it's easy for kind of law enforcement agencies to kind of, or insurance companies to kind of track that back. It all, this whole kind of like decentralized ecosystem, it's all integrated, and it links into each other to provide the data to the various points that need it, but only when they need it and only the data they need, right? So if I was going to a pub, if at the door of the pub I just scan my phone and it just confirmed that I was of the right age, but it didn't give me any other metrics about me or anything like that. But that's the way the system is set up. That's like, I kind of I take a lot of inspiration from Back to the Future trilogy, because I've kind of grown up on it.
Who doesn't?
So when I think, when I think about the future, I think about like future technology being very connected and integrated like that. And the scene that always sticks in my mind is when the police find Jen and take her back to her future house in Hill Valley, and she's in the cupboard seeing like Marty McFly getting fired by a flea, and and everything. It's just, it blows my mind away. And that's, for me, that's why I get so excited about this, because the concept of connected products connected to us as individuals and integrating them into our lives in a completely new level blows my mind away.
Perfect. What I want to do is move on to this next question, because we're talking about that connectivity, but obviously there's a lot of positive aspects that can come with blockchain. But what are some of the challenges and limitations that you think happen because of implementing blockchain in commerce?
Well, I guess some of the obvious challenges at the moment are that interoperability is one of them, as we've mentioned. But I think just general adoption. There's so much negativity outside of the kind of the circles that we talk amongst. There's so much negativity about various aspects of blockchain, and there's a brand that I'm kind of speaking to at the moment that we're going to do an NFT project, and they put the brakes on it because of the negative sentiment from their community, consumers. I don't know, consumers. I'm not fully sold on the concept of a community yet, because I'm just very cynical, and I think that people are there to sell, brands are there to sell, and I'd like to be called a consumer if that's what I'm going to be, not a community member. But that's just how I feel at the moment, and I think that's part of the brands jumping in to create communities. Just makes me more cynical, because it makes me feel like their objective is actually to add to the bottom line rather than to actually create a meaningful community. And I think if they wanted to make a meaningful community, then perhaps they wouldn't be charging for the NFTs. Perhaps their NFTs would be targeted, or the use cases would be targeted towards their existing consumers. So I think that's one issue, and obviously in the news you are always hearing, I listen to Bloomberg on the way to work every day, and there's always a very short kind of segment on Bitcoin on there. Bitcoin specifically is now, nothing about Ethereum or how incredible the Ethereum ecosystem is and how the merge happened in real time on a live financial network with, no one actually realizing, and that doesn't get mentioned. It's Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is down X amount percent today, and from all-time highs, and there's a lot of negative sentiment, and it would take, I think it would take some really compelling use cases activated, integrated into the lives of everyday consumers for the wider civilization to look at it and say, actually, this isn't just about buying pictures of it's a cliche, but buying pictures of fuzzy monkeys, or this is something else completely. This is completely different. So I would say that's the biggest issue. But interoperability is one as well. Like, why is a brand going to suddenly create a supply chain system which is all on chain if all the rest of their supply chain isn't going to do the same? How's that going to work? Or if they haven't got the point of sale systems to across the whole world to deal with that, then to pass on those DPPs, and there's a big interoperability and configuration issues to be dealt with there.
Interesting. I think the community aspect that you were talking about, and I suppose, I don't know if you come across the terminology, but this whole idea of fansumerism now. So you're no longer selling to just your consumers, but you're selling to people that are fans of the products that are part of that community. And I think that there's something to be said to notice the changing spending habits. People want to be able to have that digital community aspect in a way that's meaningful to them. And that, I think that's the hardest bit, is how do you make sure it's meaningful to that community, right? Like that's what we all want from community, is some sense of meaning on it. And there's also another aspect there that I would go, that people assume that it's either decentralized or centralized. And actually, it depends on what you want to be able to achieve, right? Not everything needs to be a decentralized database. Some things are going to work better from a centralized perspective. And it's a case of figuring out the journey for that product to be able to make sure that you're designing the systems around it and the process around it to be the best that it can be based on what you want to be able to achieve. I'm going to go on to the last question, but before I do so, if anyone's got any questions or comments they want to be able to ask, we'll have a look at it after this question. So do feel free to leave them and we'll come back to them. So our last question is, can you discuss any potential use cases for blockchain in the realm of digital identity verification of commerce? I think we've covered this in a few other points, but just as a 1 or 2 line, answer for this one.
Yeah, I think exactly like we said, signing with Ethereum kind of sums it up. So, self-sovereignty, self-sovereign identity is the thing that we should all be working towards for many reasons. But having that kind of so advanced so that everything can kind of have touch points into it, all parts of commerce, and owning assets, and owning a house, and money, lending, everything, so that can all kind of feed into it, is going to be paramount to making it effective, making it work. From a commerce perspective, it deals with KYC and AML, because you are providing the information that needs to be provided, but you're doing it in a very safe, decentralized way where you're still very much in control of that data. Signing with Ethereum, I'm sold on that concept so much. It's the more I kind of delve into it, the more compelling I find it.
Perfect. Cool. So we've got quite a lot of comments, not necessarily a lot of questions, but just some people that are saying hi from all over. We have people from San Fran here. I love to see you guys. A great comment from John Scott, which is provenance is for fine art, limitless use cases. Wow. I think that goes back to one of the examples that you're saying earlier on, of how to be able to make blockchain in a meaningful way, and just some very positive feedback on it being a very insightful time to be able to get involved with these kind of things. So we're gonna wrap up there. Thank you for everyone who joined. I know we've gone a little bit over, but thank you very much for your attention and for being with us. If you'd like to join our community, we'd love to be able to have you as part of it. So go to www.distributedrepublic.xyz we've got a bunch of resources, all of our recordings, anything that we can do to be able to help give you support. It's all free. We don't charge for any of the for most of the content that's on there. So if you want to be able to access that community, feel free. All of that stuff's there. And if you want to be able to go apply to be a guest, you can also do that on there as well. Also, if anyone's interested in sponsoring this webcast, feel free to do so. We'd love to be able to add your name to the ticker tape of people that are supporting us. So go to www.stand.store/Jamie Bykov-Brett. And if you would benefit from getting more out of this kind of content from myself or Nav, then do get in contact, because we'd love to be able to do workshops with your organization or help you brainstorm through these kind of concepts to help you give that next level of insight. But Navin, thank you so much for your time and energy and insights. It was really appreciated. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon.